Hey everyone, it's Terrence Branley with the Grow IT podcast, and today I have Ben DeBow. Did I get it right that time too?
Yes. No, you got it right.
Okay.
Yeah, you got it right.
Okay. All right. Good. I want to make sure. I've had harder ones, Ben, so I just want to make sure. Ben is the CEO of Fortified, and he's also the best-selling author of End of Abundance in Tech, which we'll get into. That's fascinating. Ben, I want to welcome you.
Oh, thanks for having me here. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your background, but I also want to know, people love to hear about the entrepreneurial journey. Not always the great stuff. It's kind of like peaks and valleys, but tell me about your background and tell me about your journey.
The background started about 25 years ago. And back in the day, data was not as, I call it, sexy as it is today. And I found my passion early on in technology, but more so in data specifically. And it just related to me, and I wanted to learn as much as I could around this industry, and I thought it was a great area to really grow and learn a lot more around data. Now, back in the early days, we used data in a lot of different ways, more to run the business, accounting, finance, human resources. Those were a lot of the first systems that were brought online. And then in 2002, I actually started Fortified. And, it's been a great journey. And one of the things I think that sort of shifted and made us who we are, but more so who made me who I am, is by making some choices around what type of projects and clients and engagements do we work on. And I decided early on is to always work on challenging projects, high number, high risk, high value, that where you're solving something that is going to, stretch your limits. And by doing that, it actually helped me better understand a lot more about myself, and it allowed me to grow. And then a lot of our people on our team really to solve problems that really challenge them, because at the end of the day, a lot of us want to solve tough problems, right?
Yep.
And over the years, just been growing an organization, and, come to 2020, almost 24, it's interesting where data is today, and sort of how it's viewed, and I love being in the space.
It's interesting you talk about going after the tough problems, right? Because sometimes as entrepreneurs in our journey,
Right.
sometimes we are apt to go after what we call the low-hanging
Yes.
fruit,
Yes.
right? Because it's the least path of resistance. It's the easiest to assist with cash flow, right? With which an entrepreneur comes into play. But from a long-term standpoint, I think your approach is the best one, right? Which is if you go after tackling the toughest problems out there, you probably don't have to worry about the health of your business in terms of a long-term standpoint, because your services will be in high demand.
Yeah. One of the things I always say is, because when you think about engaging organizations, why do they engage? It might be skill set. It might be they don't have the effort or the bench. And a lot of times it's also the risk. They don't have the skill set, but they also, there's a lot of risk there. So let's engage.
What kind of risk?
I'd say the business risk. So I'll give you a great example. A very large bank, I'll call it one of the largest three in the world, engaged us to migrate a significant amount of data between two platforms, from DB2 to SQL Server. And this was across every single bank branch. 70,000 tellers were impacted. There's a lot of risk there, because when you think about that business problem, it sounds very simple. Upgrade and migrate from DB2 to SQL Server across every bank branch for our teller applications. As you start to unwind those types of projects, you start to understand the true risk and impact. And you look at it and say, well, if I don't do my job well, if I don't, I call it execute, the project, people might not be able to take out their money, deposit checks, right? The tellers might not have a workstation that comes up and runs. You might lose data because you are migrating data from one place to another. There might be a security issue because, of how you guys are doing it, et cetera. So when you look at that business problem, that's a great example of there's a lot of risk when it might sound like an easy problem from an executive level. Hey, let's move these platforms. What I think happens over time is a lot of people lose sight of what that risk really is until you get into the trenches and you really start to unravel what are the things that need to happen to execute on this project to make it successful for the business. And that's where that risk is really known. And that's an example of, I call it a type of risk that we usually get engaged with.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing is anytime you're going into business operations, you run the risk of interrupting,
Correct.
right? Anything you do is going to impact and has the potential to interrupt their business operations. And that's what I always think from an entrepreneur's standpoint is like, man, anything that's going to impact their customers and their cash flow, I want to make sure I've got it right.
Yes. Yeah. And right now is the perfect time. We're in the peak shopping season. So, and then right around the corner is tax season. So, we're working with the different organizations on how do I make sure and answer very simple questions. Do I have enough capacity to be able to process all my load and be able to meet those business SLAs? Or I need to be able to send out all these 1099s and W-2s to all the employers around the United States. Can I do that? And have, I call it, be able to process and deliver the data accurately, the service accurately. So,
yeah. As you're talking to both prospects and clients, as of late, what are some of the problems that you're helping them solve? What are some of the problems that they're encountering right now? And some of it even could just be, hey, this is the outcome we're trying to get to. But I'm just curious of what you're seeing out in the marketplace right now.
I'm going to reverse it because I'm going to give you more of the operational answer second, and as far what I've been seeing. But one of I think the most challenging questions for people and organizations to answer today is this new concept of AI, right? So in November of 1 year ago, OpenAI and GPT 3.5 was released. And since then, there's been an immense amount of adoption, immense amount of value creation, and new organizations created, new services online. In organizations, whether it's from boardrooms, from, I call it the billboards, or from just being curious around how can I apply this in the business. And I'm part of some entrepreneur groups, and it's the most excitement and chatter I've ever seen on these Slack channels for businesses around the world. It's around AI. Now, the fundamental question is, and this is why I answer this around now, is around the challenge. People don't know how and where to start. So if we said, hey, Terrence, I want you to go implement and use AI within your business. Number one, there's only about 50,000 truly trained, educated people in that space. There's a lot of people that are coming up to speed very, very fast, right? Where do you start at? Are you going to go find one of those people? And then do you have enough money to pay for those algorithms to run within your cloud environment? And then what's the business problem you're going to solve? These are the classic questions that people are trying to solve today. But some of the other challenges that have been plaguing us for a very long time are still, I call it, the things that are affecting us today. But I think the biggest one that I see is innovation, tightening budgets, but being able to support the legacy platforms. So if you think about the traditional enterprise, I've been supporting technology for 20, 30, 40 years, right? And obviously I've retired apps over there and upgraded and maintained and managed the systems. But the business is asking for more. Why? Because they can see what technology can deliver for them. And a lot of us are turning into technology businesses. So are the budgets of technology growing as fast as the data rates and the technology adoption? No. If anything, a lot of the technology budgets are frozen this year. So how do I solve this problem? A flatline budget. I want to innovate, and I still need to maintain and invest in what I've already invested in before on technology.
Do you have an answer? Because
I do.
As you're asking that, as you're proposing that question, I'm like, yes, and because you're exactly right. And by the way, and I'm going to allow you to obviously answer this. The AI part is clearly coming into all of these conversations, and even we're doing a LinkedIn Live event on Friday specific to sales and marketing, how to integrate. We're trying to give some folks just some simple, actionable tools that they can use to try and experiment, to kind of do a proof of concept in an area of their business to kind of see how it can make it more efficient. We're trying to get an end-to-end so that they have an understanding and then go, okay, now I understand how I can potentially apply this to other areas of my business. But I want to hear your answer to or the solution to the problem that you
you sort of mentioned it in my intro. So wrote a book called End of Abundance in Tech, because one of the challenging things is we've been living under this mindset that I can just write and create code and applications, and then toss it over a wall, and they're going to be supported with no issues, right? And then every time infrastructure has an issue with a application not running well, what do? They add more resources, compute, mem, storage, right? Are we solving that problem? No. Are applications written with any constraints on resources or on budget if you were to price that utilization like an electric bill? No. So we've been living under the assumption that, I can build whatever I want. I could toss it over a wall. I could keep adding features, which then collect more and more data. So data is growing 23% compounded annual growth rates. I wish my bank account grew that much, right?
Yeah, me too.
Our insurance, it's almost like the insurance is growing that much, unfortunately, as well.
Yes.
But
and inflation.
Oh, yes. So it's like, how do we change and actually start to design with efficiency in mind? And I'm talking to organizations around how to start to put it and change and develop an efficiency mindset. So when I develop that next application, let's actually look at it and have multiple acceptance criteria, not just functional, making sure it works, but also making sure it does one of two things. That piece of code is either efficiency, having a certain efficiency score. So in some of the technology we have efficiency scores, or else I believe that there'll be acceptance or rejection based upon, will this code fit in my budget? So I'll have a cost of code, what I call total cost of code. And if it doesn't fit in my budget, it goes back to the FinOps model, I can't deploy it because I'm then pushing it to production and I'm going to exceed my budget, which is going to cause other challenges down the street. So it's changing the mindsets, one. And then there is an immense amount of opportunity for organizations to do cost takeouts today, but they don't see it. It's the iceberg under the water. And I'm going to give you a unique stat. 1% equals 50%. 1% of your processes equals 50%.
Are you looking at my bank account?
Yeah, no. Yeah. So 1% of the processes equal about 50% of the total cost or footprint or resource consumption. Most people don't.
Say that again, Ben. I think that's important.
Yeah. So think about when we think about your application, a lot of times if we think I have to save money, I'm like, oh man, I got to rewrite this to be cloud native. I got to refactor this to be a lot more efficient. And we get overwhelmed. But the data we have in our technology by assessing these environments around the world is 1% of the processes equal 50 to 80% of the actual cost in most of the and now this data specific to database platforms, but we're moving up the stack. And I think in the app code space, you're going to see some similar ratios where it's maybe a 1 to 25%. But what that really means is if I optimize just 1% of my environment, and a lot of times it's less than that, I could get a 50% return on my investment. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's adding both on when you build new and then you look at what you are supporting today. That's how you're going to start to be able to continue to innovate without having those budgets grow at those crazy growth rates.
It's interesting. We even in the sales and marketing side, we talk about that a lot. That we haven't used the 1% of 50,
yeah.
But we use the 1% incremental
Correct.
gain that we can do on let's call it some marketing or top
Correct.
of funnel activities that have a much higher that percentage of efficiency
Correct.
grows as it moves down the funnel.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I haven't seen it posed before on the tech side of things.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I was chatting with one of the big three cloud and one of the individuals over a large amount of the AI cloud infrastructure, right? What was interesting was, he was intrigued by the name of the book. And then I said, okay, what do you do? And he said, well, we are working with organizations on selling them AI. And he said, if I have 100,000 GPUs tomorrow, I still can't be able to provide the level and the number of services to answer all the questions right now. That's 100,000 GPUs. Like think about the NVIDIA chips, right?
Yeah.
I said, well, so-and-so, do you know what mindset you're in? You're in the scarcity mindset. And he's like, yeah, because in everything that he does based upon that mindset upstream, he's solving his problems downstream differently, right? And it goes back down to what we said at the very beginning is Well, how are people developing apps today? Their mindset, once you just change it, what and how you solve problems changes.
Talk to me a little bit about that, because like, and obviously we had a conversation, a few months
Right.
ago, and I remember being when you had hit me with that in terms of the abundance of tech
Correct.
is no longer. I went and read one of your
Correct.
articles, and I was like, wow,
No.
right. I think I posted on LinkedIn as well.
Correct.
But talk a little bit about that mindset shift. Is it one from a standpoint? Is it as simple of going from a mindset of scarcity to abundance, and what are some of the questions that executive can ask
Correct.
themselves, which way they're thinking?
Yeah, great question. And when you think about where do you start, and I talk about the mindset, I think one of it is understanding, especially in the tech industry. Let's say you are building an app, you ask me to write a piece of code. If I understand and think that this piece of code just needs to be completed so I could execute like the sprint, be able to push that code to production, right? That's going to meet the task. But if I start to think, okay, well, this piece of code is probably going to run for 5 or 10 years in production as I push this. So once I know that, I'm like, okay. And if I have to be able to fit it in a certain budget or, have it be a certain performance profile, I'm going to change how I potentially design that, what level of effort I put into the testing. And I'm probably going to do testing around the performance footprint. I'm going to do a couple extra steps because I changed my mindset. And I know that what I'm building today is going to need to be able to support that environment long-term. And it has a long-term impact as that application might be successful. So that's like a very basic, I call it, example. If you are designing an architecture, right? So if you bring it up 5 levels to your enterprise architects, right now we're working with an organization to design the global environment for in the hospitality industry. Well, how do you go from designing a more of a scale up to a scale out and then go global? Well, if I make certain design choices to have 1 replica or 2 replicas in each region versus, I call 3 or 4. On my picture, I might go, wow, this provides us so much great redundancy and distributed data and scale out reporting. But if I answer that question and put a cost over it, well, what's the cost of that? And then I start to understand, oh, wow, there's a true TCO to that. That starts to change that mindset as well, because again, money's not unlimited for most organizations.
For everyone other than the Fed seems to think that it's just a shot across the bow.
I know.
I know you're dealing with a lot of enterprises. Can't name names a lot of times, but you can talk about the successes that you
Right.
had, and again in terms with them. And I think that's so important. And let me define success stories, right? Because it isn't always about hey, we grew our revenue 10x, right?
Right.
It can be, hey, we were in this really tough position, or we were in this, we were trying to do something that seemed impossible, right? And trying to figure out how it could, how we could rip a band-aid off,
Right.
or multiple band-aids off to solve a problem. And I know that I've talked to so many, founders, execs from IT consulting firms that have had this. So that's why I want to ask you is, give me some success stories that may not be the 10x,
Right.
but could have solved big problems. And especially, going back to how we kicked this thing off in terms of you loving to solve those big problems. Give me some success stories revolving around lately solving some of those big problems for clients.
Yeah. And some of these are where it is, I have to solve a problem, and you have these variables that they give you. We cannot buy a single new piece of hardware. Our storage array is what it is, right? So one of the toughest types of problems we have, because a lot of times when we think about solving problems, we think about, I can go out with a shopping cart and put anything I want in there, and then I can go into battle all equipped to be able to solve problems, right? Certain organizations, it's more like the MacGyver. right? You think about what MacGyver used to do, right? And if you're older, you know exactly what I'm talking.
Duct tape and hairpins.
I know. So I have a joke over my consulting bag over here. I carry two things: duct tape, WD-40. Because if you want performance, spray with WD-40. If you want to fix it, duct tape, right?
So, I love that.
But yeah, we walk in organizations, and this is a tax organization. They process the majority of tax returns that were electronically filed for X, right? And for 3 years in a row, well, number one, we got called in when they couldn't scale and they couldn't solve performance problem, and they were actually down for over a week because of some refactoring, right? They had the best intentions, but they are down. We came in, we had them up and running in 2 hours. And then what happens when you save someone's life? They're a customer for a very long time. So we were insurance policy for the next several years. They would call us in every year and say, hey, make sure that we're good. Are there any risks here? Are we going to be able to meet the demand? Hey, by the way, we're growing. But the one thing that they kept on saying is, we can't buy any new hardware and we can't replace anything. You have to make it work with what we have. I said, so year one, you optimize, you find a lot of low hanging fruit, you optimize, and it works. Year two, well, what level of optimization is left because you already cleaned up the room last year? Well, obviously they added a whole bunch of new features and capabilities. Their data grew. So then you still optimize, but that range narrowed a little bit. Then by year three, you're like, okay, I've already optimized you a significant amount and cleaned up all the simple to easy. Now you're starting to get into areas of the app that are a little bit more high risk, et cetera, because we can't change all these variables. And you sort of can't change this. So you're really constrained on what you can potentially optimize if you still need to. Those are the best problems that we try to solve because it also makes you think differently. And the one thing I always love to be able to do is when you're solving problems, what are the assumptions that can be made and what are the gates that can be put up? Because once I understand the assumptions and or the gates, if I can add some assumptions to there, it greatly usually simplifies my solutions too. So if
go ahead. I was just going to ask, do you need to test some of those assumptions sometimes, or how do you go about that process?
Some of these are business. Yeah. So obviously if you do put an assumption in a place that I'm going to assume that all data is X, you need to go test that. But the assumptions I love is where we work with the business and saying, do you really need that person to search on every single field on the screen? Or do you really need to retain 7 years of data or 10 or 14 years of data? Do you really need to process this, and this all at the same time? Because if you can, as a business owner, make a couple decisions, say, no, I'm flexible on my time. And most people don't know when things were actually being executed. And timing of process is one of the most simple things you could shift around. And what happens when you shift a large process to run an hour later? You actually just shifted potentially 30% of the load to another time. What did that do to the system? It gives you that much extra oxygen. So imagine if you're in a marathon, you're at the end of the race, and I give you 30% more capacity and strength and energy. What happens? You'll do amazing, right?
It's amazing. Sometimes I think that those who come up with the best solutions are the ones who ask the best questions. Correct. And that's kind of what you're referring to.
I love Columbo, by the way. So when you talk about a person that asks the great questions,
you're going way deep. You start with MacGyver, now you're going Palumbo.
Yeah, no, yeah. The one thing is we don't walk in with trench coats because that's sort of creepy. So
that and the duct tape and the WD-40, man, you'd really be scared.
Yeah, I know.
So I do want to get into your book, and from two standpoints. Correct. One, I think a lot of entrepreneurs have great books in their head. The IP that they developed over the course of a career is phenomenal. And I want to understand what your process is, why you did it, why you considered doing it, how much work was involved. And number two, how do you feel it's impacted your business?
So great question. And it's something that, other people will reach out because there are a lot of great ideas in heads and, that people want to share. And the toughest part, I found out 5 years ago I have dyslexia. I didn't know I had dyslexia until I found out my daughter did. And then my wife was like, hey, Ben, there's a lot of similar things that you do or don't do that I think you have dyslexia. And I'm like, so once I understood that and I started asking those questions, I realized I actually had dyslexia. I had to learn because I couldn't write 2 paragraphs when I entered college. And now it's tough. So, even if I have these ideas and I want to write a book, how do you do that? And it actually took me about 20 years to learn how to actually write well. And I had some great mentors. And it's that the repetition thing that we're talking about a little bit earlier today. Repetition and learning. And by having confidence in the writing ability, second is having the idea. And I knew that I wanted to be able to get some of my thoughts and ideas out there in the marketplace, because I see some things that I believe others don't see that are going to be problems right around the corner, right? And for me to be able to multiply that message out there, I think books are a great way. And that's why I partner with Forbes and Advantage Media on helping get this message out there, help me develop the message, because what I started with the book outline is not 100% of what I ended with. And
I've heard that same comment from others.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I was very interesting to me was, for the first time in 20 years, I had to look and really focus on one thing for 9 months. So it took me about 9 months to write a book. And I always say you can't easily BS your way through a book, writing a book. And it's the first time I actually got to really focus and dive deep and reflect on one subject matter for 9 months. Because in a business, when you're an entrepreneur, you are, here, there, and everywhere. But what came out of that process was, I think, something very amazing. And that's what is in the book. It's a lot of reflection on what we've learned over the last 25 years, me and my team, from being in industry. And then also looking forward and saying, well, where are we going? What are the variables that have changed? And are we going to be wanting more technology, more data in the future, or less? And I think we only want more. Well, how are we going to give that to the business while balancing budgets and keeping our margins?
Yeah. Well, it's a good lead in, because that's the next question I have is what are some of the upcoming trends? I know that AI is the easy one to jump on, and that's okay if we discuss that. But what are some of those when you look around the corner from your viewpoint, from your pure view? What are some of the things that you see? Obviously, AI is a big part of that. But what are some of the things that you see? And some of it, again, no one has a crystal ball. We can look around the corner, but that doesn't mean that we can see 3 years in the future. But we're using our best guesstimates. What are some of the things that you see coming down the pike, and that businesses should either be aware of or should be trying to look at incorporating into some of their 1 year, 3 year plans?
The number of applications and technology devices coming online is only going to keep increasing. The rate of data creation and ingestion is only going to keep increasing. And one of the challenging things I see for organizations, whether or not they have data observability tools, application performance monitoring tools, those are the APMs, or I call it the subject matter expert tools, which are all the other things, is how do we continue to support and solve performance issues, outages, and other critical issues within my technology infrastructure that supports and creates and services those organizations. Because the teams today are inundated with data. They're inundated with noise. And we need to have better ways that we identify and solve issues. One of the analogies I give very frequently is, we didn't design the human body, but we've, a lot of times our perception is that physician better be right. But when you go into technology and you have an outage, you have 15 people on that call, 30 people on the call. And it's interesting because then everybody goes around the horn and says, hey, are we okay? And everybody goes, yeah, my area is green, but they're not solving the problem. So we need to get a lot better at simplifying both what data and metrics actually mean something coming off these devices and interpreting the health of these systems. And we need to start to use machine learning and AI together to better help analyze this data, to be able to identify anomalies. And then however the community is solving these things, provide those answers or recommendations with certain confidence levels. tell the person what is not happening at that point in time that's contributing to that issue, because that automatically eliminates a significant amount of where you look. So that's one area that people need to focus on. And I think the other one is just data. So I'm going to pick on data for a second. We are all data hoarders. I mean, I don't know how many images and files you have on your phone, but when's the last time you actually look through those and prune those? Organizations are in a very tough situation because they have an immense amount of data. Sometimes that needs to be maintained and managed because of regulatory requirements, but more so, it's a lot of data that is not valuable, but it costs money to store, to be able to back up, to index, to update statistics. So I think data lifecycle management, enterprise data strategy are two other areas that we really need to focus on at the organizational level, because you've inherited all this data and you've supported it, but we really need to clean house, because in a lot of ways it's a liability to you, a legal liability by you having that data around. And it's a huge cost that we don't understand and don't see. So I think that the second one is, how do we better manage and analyze data and really understand what data is valuable to an organization? Not all data is valuable. So once we understand that, I think, that's going to really help organizations, less is more, right? Really focus on, okay, I don't need all this other data. Here's the data that my business believes in, that it is valuable. Let's monetize this. Let's let this drive our business decisions. So those are a couple areas that I see.
And like you said, businesses are not generating less data.
Correct.
Right. And that is still probably going to be the hockey stick effect that we see in terms of generating more and more data. But that doesn't always necessarily mean, that it's a good thing. Sometimes you can get, paralysis by analysis. And maybe to your point, let me ask this. Do you think that AI will help us in terms of, I think I'm turning the question upside down, but I'm asking anyway. Do you think that AI will be able to assist us in helping us with that pruning process with the data? Because a lot of times we talk about, hey, we need to get our data clean and straight first and understand what's important before we can integrate AI processes, which I understand.
Correct.
But do you think that there is that we will have the ability to have AI assist us in helping us determine what's the best data to keep or get rid of, and to make things more efficient in terms of our data usage?
The AI where it's at today, would not help us significantly, just because it's more focused on large language models, et cetera.
Right.
But I think in the future, where I see some opportunities is leveraging, I call it, different technologies together, and some of it's machine learning too, because I have all this data around my universe, and all these co-pilots are being, created by Microsoft and others, right? So if I know who's looking at what and who's touching what, and what are all my dependencies, interactions, right? I know what Excel sheets are in there, and they are going to have, they have co-pilots for Excel, right? And then I could go analyze all this data. Well, that's where I could start to build some other metadata about this data that I'm using, and start to really understand. It's almost like the heat map. So if I was to heat map my whole organization's data and who touched it, and somehow related to something around value, it'd be very interesting to see how much data is not touched. And then I think through some of these technologies probably combined, I will be able to really understand what data is valuable, what data is being used. But if you flip that question on its side, the question is, what data is not being used that's so valuable, right? Because we all look at the data that, I know where that Excel spreadsheet is, I know where that data source is, and so forth. But what about this data that is over here that just is ingested in, and the business unit that probably is the best to analyze it just doesn't know it's there, or does not have access to it? So I think that's the question, but that's also the challenge. People do not get rid of data because of that. I don't know what I don't know, therefore I'm not deleting anything. We have to take some action there, or else we're going to keep on just, I call it, supporting. That's why they build all these storage container units across the United States. I joke that the same's happening for all of our
Data
databases.
hoarding.
Yeah,
I think
all
there's
the
a lot
data
of data
hoarding.
hoarding going on.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. As you were talking through that, I immediately thought of my mom. She's not a hoarder, so mom, I apologize. I'm not trying to compare you to a hoarder, but she's saved everything, right?
Yeah.
And I liken it to that. Like, I'm not sure if I'm going to need it, so I'm just going to keep it and put it over here in this closet, and
Yes.
you know, and have it just
We
in
all do
case.
that. I mean, have a closet back there, the door is closed, don't look into there, right? Yeah.
What is it that you enjoy the most about what you do? You know, obviously we talked about the problem solving part, but
Yeah.
I mean, you know, again, what are some of the things that you enjoy about, uh, you know, your company,
Yeah.
your offerings, and what you do?
It, the people in the team that we've built, we were remote first before COVID. I mean, way a while back, because one of the things I wanted to be able to do is access very talented people wherever they live.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about when you do that, it's not just about having that talented person on the team. By letting them live where they want, what you're doing is allowing them to benefit and continue to be happy. So we have a lady who lives in Upper Peninsula, Michigan. She does, cross country skiing at lunch. She does all this other outdoor stuff, right? Then other people live in other areas. What you're doing is enabling others to truly live I think, a more valuable life, because they're living either around family, around the things they want to do, and they're choosing to do that. But then they also get to solve those tough problems, and still be engaged and challenged mentally and grow mentally. So I think it's building that team, and then at the end of the day, having fun, because we want to have fun doing what we do as much as possible. We always know that there's going to be those tough times where we're sweating, we're stressing, and we're being asked to do things that I don't feel as comfortable with. That's not my unique ability. But at the end of the day, it's how do we create a culture and a team that can thrive the majority of the time and give them what they need. So I think that's one of the things that we love doing. I live by Charlotte, North Carolina, and I live right across from 2,100 acres. I'm over there most of the time. I choose to live here, right? If I had to live in downtown Manhattan or something like that, I would not be as happy.
I agree with you. I moved from Southern California to Boise, Idaho, and I would say that my level of happiness has gone on probably exponentially.
Correct.
So I can see that.
Yeah.
Are you guys hiring? I mean, you it sounds like
yeah.
If you're a growing company, and again, that's why I want to give you a quick plug to be able to.
Yeah, we're hiring on both companies. So we actually have two organizations. One's focused on database consulting and managed services. We're hiring over there, and then I was crazy enough to start another organization about 18 months ago. Just getting done doing some exciting stuff, and we're going to be building out a full team over the next 6 months. So if you are wanting to solve challenging problems, and we're building an A team, definitely reach out.
Great. By the way, that's the third TV show that you've mentioned, and you probably didn't even mean it.
I know. The A team driving around in the van.
Yeah, we're probably in similar, age demographic in those shows. When you bring them up, it's always so funny, right? Because it's like I can instantly picture those in my head. And as soon as you said that, even though I talk about hiring A players a lot, it was the context of you using A team that I immediately started thinking of. Oh man, what's his name? The guy with the mohawk and
Mr. T.
Mr. T.
Yes. Yeah. But then you also had Hannibal, which is great, and solving those problems, right?
Yeah. The duct tape and WD-40 guy.
Yes.
Well, if a business owner or executive is watching this as we look to wrap up here, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time today, and they're wondering how you can help, them with their business, their problems, right? You're a big problem solver. What would you tell them is a good next step?
One is reaching out, and we have those conversations around strategy and now mindset. So I'm doing two different things. There's a technology assessment we have out there on bendabo.com, which is sort of my personal site that we're offering some of that thought leadership. And the other one is I'm going around and talking to organizations around a lot of these concepts and changing that mindset. Because if your team keeps on, I call it doing what they've done yesterday, and you are trying to clean up and optimize and really innovate, it's going to be very, very challenging to, I call it, get that different outcome. So I'm talking to organizations how they could change the mindset at the top level, within the technology, designing their own culture within technology, and then starting to execute on that plan. So I think those are two of the ways that, they could definitely reach out and engage.
I'll make sure and put your website. Speaking of which, are there other areas that people can follow you? On Twitter or LinkedIn?
Yeah, there's LinkedIn, Twitter, the podcast, the books, on Forbes, and I mean, I think there's several different places.
I agree, and I'll make sure and put all the links there. I definitely think that you've won so far in terms of the person with the most places to find good content and information about you. But that's why I'm grateful and appreciate you coming on, because you've done a great job. And to be perfectly frank, I aspire to, trying to put out as much content as you have,
Correct.
because I think it's just so important, not only for positioning yourself, but for positioning your company, and allowing, the prospects that are out there to be able to come and learn about you in I like to call it a non-sales type. This is coming from the sales and marketing guy. I like to call it a non-sales type environment, right? And then to learn to build that trust and relationship that we both know is so important, in the consultative world. So.
Yeah. Well, I think you said it correctly. It's, putting out what's in your head out there is so important, because think about the amount of knowledge and experiences you have, and we all need to share. A lot of times we think that by not sharing, that's going to help somebody, whether it's code, whether it's your scripts, whether or not it's your ideas and so forth. Share, because as soon as you share, others are going to inspire, and then they level up and build on top of that. And then that's how you mature ideas. So I think, I think the call to action is, keep on sharing. Definitely, I look forward to reading some of the stuff you've put out there too.
Well, I'll try and keep up, but I can't tell you how much I agree with you in terms of, and it's the abundance, right? Yeah. It's having that abundance mindset, and that's come to me kind of later on in my career, and I cannot stress how important it is. I wish I could talk to my younger me and having them put that, start to have that mindset earlier in my career, because it's just so important. And I think it helps all of us get to where we want to go in one way or another.
Correct. Yeah. Well, thank you for the time today. It's been
greatly appreciate it. I want to make sure the only thing I ask is that I can have you back on the show again. I love your insight, and I'm anxious to see how the AI component comes into things. But I greatly appreciate your time, and thankful that you came on the Grow IT podcast today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You bet.